Hello everyone, and welcome to Your Health in Your Hands. I'm Dr. David Ajibade with the Brain and Body Foundation. And we have a very special topic today and a very special guest. And we'll be going through, I'll be introducing her in a minute. Just remember, everything we do here on this show is to educate you, the Nigerian, especially the Nigerian, but also the black person, the African, about health matters that are germane, relevant to you specifically. So today we're going to be talking about sickle cell disease, especially in Nigeria. And our guest on the show, again, a very special person. I've known her for over 15 years. I was a junior doctor at National Hospital when I first met her, and she has been one of the rocks in the field of pediatrics, especially in sickle cell disease. So yes, our topic today is sickle cell disease in Nigeria, and with me on the show is Dr. Oniyongi, Dr. Oluseyi Oniyongi. She is a pediatrician, consultant pediatrician with National Hospital. She was once the the chairman of the medical advisory committee at one time, and has held several posts. She's a voice, a strong voice in Nigeria with regards to sickle cell disease. So Dr. Oniyongi, thank you so much for joining me on the show, joining us on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on the program.
Thank you very much. So sickle cell disease, let's go through the statistics. I mean, it was only until recently that I knew that Nigeria was #1 where sickle cell disease is concerned.
Yes.
The numbers, how many altogether?
Well, sickle cell disease is the major public health problem in Nigeria. It's the commonest inherited disorder in Nigeria. And where about 2 to 3% of our population of 160 million people are affected by the disease. So if you were to do the maths, how many people will that come to?
I didn't do it to a math, but I hear it's about between 2 and 4 million.
On an average, about 3 million persons are affected by sickle cell disease in Nigeria.
Wow.
And in addition to that, every year about 300,000 babies are being born with sickle cell disease.
Wow.
Now that is a very large number. And the reason that we have this very large number in Nigeria is because a quarter of us, 25% of us, carry the sickle cell trait.
Which is what they call AS, right?
Which is AS genotype. So when two people who are AS genotype come together, they have a 1 in 4 chance of having a child that is SS, that carries the sickle cell disease SS genotype. If you were to take a room of 10 Nigerians, 4 people would be AS. So that should give you an idea of the magnitude of the problem in Nigeria. It is a major problem.
That is outstanding. I mean, 300,000 is twice what I've read it was, because I used to think it was 150. I read it was 150,000.
300,000 annually, but 150,000 in Nigeria. 150 to 200,000 are born in Nigeria every year.
Got it. And just for perspective, in the U.S. alone, they have about 150,000, from what I read, 150,000 altogether sickle cell patients in the whole of the U.S., which is more than 3 times our population. And apparently there's a lot of research being done in the U.S. concerning sickle cell disease. I think we should be, what's the research like in Nigeria?
Well, we are involved in some research in Nigeria. We could do a lot more, but a lot has been done in Nigeria as regards sickle cell disease, and particularly as regards treatment options in sickle cell disease.
Okay. And we'll get to that probably later on in this show, right?
Yes, we would.
Okay. All right. So, of the 150 to 200,000 that are born every year with sickle cell disease, how many survive past the age of 10?
Well, actually, I was hoping you wouldn't ask
Let's hear the bad
that
news.
question, because that is actually the bad news. Now, of the 150,000 that are born with sickle cell disease in Nigeria, in the past, it used to be that about 80 to 90% of them would not live past their 5th birthday. But I say that is in the past, because now with advances in medical care, prompt identification of the child with sickle cell disease, the mortality from sickle cell disease has actually decreased significantly. So we don't have as much deaths as we used to have in the past.
Okay.
And what we tend to have now are illnesses, acute episodic illnesses as well as chronic illnesses. The chronic, the effects of the condition as the children now live to become adults, and they grow into adults and into parenthood themselves.
Right. So we're actually having sickle cell patients become parents themselves, and they do well again because of the advancements and better knowledge about how to deal with the condition.
Yes, you're right.
Okay. So that's some good news. Now, of the again, more bad news, but those who die at an early age, is there a pattern to them? What's the commonest cause of death with these children who die before the age of 10, for instance?
Well, for the children who die early, most of it is from acute illnesses related to sickle cell disease. So we can have children dying from infections in sickle cell disease. We can have children dying from anemia, from shortage of blood in sickle cell disease. Those are the two commonest reasons why the children tend to die. And this is primarily, again, it's because we haven't identified the child with sickle cell disease. So if we don't know which child has sickle cell disease, it's difficult for us to provide the care that is required to enable the child to have a good quality of life. But by far and large, those are the two commonest causes of death. But what we are most familiar with when we say sickle cell disease is pain in sickle cell disease. There's a lot of pain associated with sickle cell disease. Pain in the bones, pain in the head, pain in any part of the body, which is a major complication of sickle cell disease. So pain we're very much familiar with. The child would cry, bony swellings here and there, abdominal pain, back pain, leg pain, chest pain, difficulty walking, pain everywhere, really. A lot of pain, excruciating pain. Very awful for the child who is affected, for the parents of the child, and even for the caregiver of the child. Watching a child in pain is not It's not an easy thing.
I can imagine. And again, some of it is, I've heard this from a couple of parents too, that the child going through this, child begins to know what sickle cell disease is all about, and they will ask the question, or the most difficult questions a child can ask the parent: why did you give birth to me?
It's difficult, but if the parents are not aware of their own genotypes, then they run the risk, like I said earlier, of having a child with sickle cell disease. So we all need to know what our genotypes are, so that we don't run the risk of having children who would be born with sickle cell disease.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a short break here, and then in the next segment we're just going to go into some of the complications. I know Dr. Nyongi has mentioned a few, but we'll go into some of them, the short-term and long-term complications. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Your Health in Your Hands. I'm Dr. David Ajibade, and with me on the show is Dr. Oluseyi Oniyongi, who is a consultant pediatrician. We are talking about sickle cell disease in Nigeria. Dr. Oniyongi, thank you again. And we were talking about in the last segment about sickle cell disease, some of the general statistics. Let's delve into complications of sickle cell disease. What are they?
There are many complications of sickle cell disease, as you can imagine, because this is a disorder that affects the blood cells in the body. So the complications can be divided into two to make for easy understanding. We have the acute complications and long-term complications. The acute complications are those that occur suddenly in the child, and some of them can actually be life-threatening. I'll give a few examples. Infections in children with sickle cell disease can lead to rapid breakdown of the red blood cells of the children, and this causes sudden anemia, severe anemia, or shortage of blood, as we say. And these children would require to have a lot of treatments, including blood transfusions. They can also have pain, like we talked about earlier. Sudden occurrence of pain all over the body in the children. And in fact, the women with sickle cell disease that have had babies say that the pain of sickle cell disease is more painful than labor pains.
Wow.
Now, saying this to a man may not mean much, but I'm sure the majority of women listening would understand this.
Well, I've heard it's the most painful experience known to man.
Yes, it is.
So
you can imagine how painful severe crisis in sickle cell disease can be. Other complications that we can have that are acute complications, we've talked about infection, pain, shortage of blood. We can have other acute complications that could affect the bones, for example. So we have the children limping on one leg, having severe pain in one part of the body, and then we could also have acute complications affecting the brain. Now, the long-term complications are those in which the organs of the body get damaged because of the sickle cell disease, and these can occur in any organ of the body. In fact, sickle cell disease is one of the commonest reasons why adults in Nigeria are on chronic dialysis from kidney failure, because sickle cell disease affects the kidneys and may lead to sickle cell, may lead to kidney failure eventually. You can have it affecting the heart and leading on to heart disease, could affect the lungs, could affect the vertebral column, could affect any part of the body, the bones, all parts of the body. So those are the acute and long-term complications of sickle cell disease that we can have.
Well, that's a lot. How does that affect the quality of life? I know you mentioned something about the brain.
Yes, I did. Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because that's not an often mentioned complication of sickle cell disease. The quality of life of a child with sickle cell disease is affected. If the child continues to have pain, requires admission for blood transfusion, cannot play with his friends, cannot play football, for example. Imagine growing up as a child, you cannot play football.
Right.
That is not going to be a very happy child. And one of the other things that affects the quality of life of a child with sickle cell disease is when the child has a stroke. Yes, strokes do happen in children, and sickle cell disease is the commonest cause of stroke in a child.
Oh, I see.
We see strokes happening in children with sickle cell disease, and this affects the quality of life of the child because of the complications that can happen from the stroke in the child.
Right. So that's tragic, if you think about it, because when we think about strokes, we think more in terms of hypertension, diabetes, all these things happening to older people.
Yes.
Right, older people as in 50s and above. But when you talk about a child having a stroke, you're talking about at what age can a child have a stroke?
We're talking about children as young as 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old.
Oh my goodness.
They can have strokes, and they do have strokes. We have a lot of such children in Nigeria that have had strokes. This is because in the sickle cell clinic that we run, we see these children, and it's the same all over the country.
Okay.
The children are apparently well the night before, because it doesn't give warning signs like you would say.
Right.
They're apparently well the night before they go to bed, and by the morning they have a stroke. It's as tragic as that. And of course it affects, because it's something that affects the brain of a growing child, it prevents that child from ever attaining his maximum potential in life. It's as bad as that. The child is going to be, some children are lucky. After having a stroke, they don't have many complications. Other children are not so lucky. After having a stroke, they may go on to have difficulty walking, difficulty speaking. Some are even wheelchair bound. They cannot walk. Some cannot attend regular schools, and those that attend regular schools may not be able to catch up with their peers and compete favorably with their peers. Some may even have convulsions, seizure disorders, because of the strokes that they have had. So all of these things tend to affect the quality of life of a child that has had a stroke, in addition to sickle cell disease.
And you mentioned too, I remember when we were talking earlier, that you've had a stroke, one stroke, it predisposes you to repeated strokes.
Yes, it does. There's a 50% chance that there would be another stroke once a child has had a stroke. It is as high as that.
Oh my goodness.
Once a child has had a stroke, everybody has to be on the alert to try and make sure that that child does not have another stroke, because the chances are very high that the child is going to have a repeat stroke.
So it all comes back to prevention and hopefully treatment that we'll probably talk about in the next segment, right?
Yes.
And real quick before we go into the next segment, I know we talked about AS and AA, but it looks like there are also like AC and other things that could be term sickle cell disease, as well as just the straightforward SS patients.
Yes, sickle cell disease happens when we have a child that is born with the hemoglobin S. That's the abnormal sickle cell gene, the abnormal sickle cell in the red blood cells, plus another abnormal hemoglobin molecule. So when there are two abnormal hemoglobin molecules in the blood cell of a child, that child has SS disease. That's sickle cell anemia. But the child with sickle cell disease could have just one sickle cell gene, one hemoglobin S, plus another abnormal gene. For example, the southwestern part of the country, we have a lot of abnormal hemoglobin C. Sorry, I use the Yoruba people because I'm a Yoruba person.
Me too.
So we have hemoglobin S and hemoglobin C.
Okay.
So when they come together, it is also sickle cell disease.
Okay.
We could also have sickle cell thalassemia, when we have sickle cell, one hemoglobin S gene and another abnormal gene that affects the development of the hemoglobin molecule. And that is another form of very severe sickle cell disease. So they're varying. We could have hemoglobin SD, for example, if there's an abnormal D hemoglobin. But the commonest genotypes that we have in Nigeria are SS anemia, which is when there are two genes for sickle cell disease, and SC disease. Those are the two commonest types that we have, although we also have the thalassemia traits in parts of the country as well.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up.
Now, the person who is a carrier of the sickle cell gene has one normal hemoglobin molecule and one abnormal hemoglobin molecule, which is the S hemoglobin. So that person has a genotype which we refer to as AS. The person is not sick, but the person is a carrier of the sickle cell gene. And if that person, like I said earlier, marries somebody who is also a carrier of another abnormal gene, there's a possibility that the child could have a 25% chance with every pregnancy that the child could have sickle cell disease.
25%.
So some families can be lucky and they will have 0 children with sickle cell disease. Others might have 1 child with sickle cell disease. Others might have all of their children with sickle cell disease.
And we've seen a few of them like that.
We've seen that, yes.
All right, so we're going to get back. We'll be back shortly to talk about prevention and treatment of sickle cell disease. So don't go away. We'll see you soon. Welcome back. I'm with Dr. Oniyongi of the National Hospital, consultant pediatrician, talking about sickle cell disease in Nigeria. Doc, how do we prevent these terrible, terrible complications?
Well, the first way to prevent these complications is to identify the child that has sickle cell disease, which is still a major problem for us. I'll just spend 1 minute on what the government is doing about identifying children with sickle cell disease.
Good.
There are some centers in Nigeria that have the capacity to identify sickle cell disease in the newborn child, so that all children who are born in the country eventually will have their newborn screening for sickle cell disease. And that way we'll be able to identify the child with sickle cell disease and place the child on appropriate treatment to prevent these complications that we have spoken about. There are many centers. The closest one to us is at the Federal Medical Center in Kefi, which is a center where newborn screening can take place.
Okay.
So we need to be able to identify the child with sickle cell disease. Then we need to be able to place these children in areas where they can access care. Prevention of complications is very important. The children have to be looked after. They have to attend regular clinics. They have to be immunized against infections. They need to be protected from malaria, because malaria is still a significant problem in our environment, and it triggers off a lot of crises in children with sickle cell disease, including painful crises, needing blood transfusion, convulsions. So they need to be protected against malaria. We do this by giving them some medications and by environmental control using the insecticide-treated mosquito bed nets and looking after the environment. In addition to that, the children themselves have to know about the disease. Not only the caregivers have to know about their disease, but the children themselves should be educated as early as possible about sickle cell disease, which is a lifelong disease for them. So they have to know how to drink a lot of water, which helps in preventing their painful crises. They have to know that they can play football for one half of the match and sit out the other half of the match, so that they can have a regular quality of life. In preventing some of the more severe complications of sickle cell disease, like stroke, there is a way in which it is possible to identify the child who is at risk of having a stroke. And this is by doing a test that is called a transcranial Doppler ultrasound. This test is done by looking at the blood vessels that are going to the brain, and if there are any abnormalities, it's a simple, very non-invasive ultrasound that just measures the blood vessels going into the brain. And once we identify the children who are at risk of having stroke, we can offer them treatment to try to prevent this from happening.
Good.
But the thrust is that we must identify the child who is at risk of having the stroke. And like I tell my mothers in the clinic, it is most important that we do this test, which is available in the country, which the federal government has placed the machine to do these tests in all of the geopolitical zones of the country. So we have some capacity to do these tests both in the federal, both in the public sector as well as in the private sector. And I tell my mothers, rather than buy that Christmas dress that you want, use this money to go and do this test. Because when you do this test, we can identify the child at risk of a stroke and offer treatment. Could be simple treatment, just like taking some drugs, or it could also be having to do with some more complicated things.
Well, okay, that's a good one. It's the 6 geopolitical zones. Is there a map that we can maybe put on the website where people can just go on to see where these Doppler ultrasounds scans are being done?
I will refer us to there's the sickle cell disease policy of Nigeria.
Okay. It's
been done by the federal government of Nigeria, and it shows exactly where these 6 machines have been placed.
Okay.
So it's available. If you just Google it, I mean, our children are Googling everything now.
Okay.
If they just Google where to do the transcranial Doppler ultrasounds in Nigeria, it'll come up with the map.
Okay.
But it's on the website of the
so they can find out where that is.
Yes.
And then you mentioned prevention of this. Once you identify those who are at high risk,
yes.
Prevention.
Yes.
What are the drugs available for that? Are they available in stores?
Yes, the drugs are easily available. What we use most commonly is the drug hydroxyurea. Hydroxyurea should be given by the specialists, by the doctors who are looking after children with sickle cell disease. We have a fair amount of experience now. It's been many years since we started using the drug. And the fear of the side effects by the public, what we have seen from using the drug is that these side effects are not as common. We don't see them commonly. So we have found the drug. We have used the drug at National Hospital for upwards of 10 years. And our children have grown up to go to university. They're doing well in school. And we haven't seen major side effects. Of course, there are always side effects from all drugs, even paracetamol. We might find some rashes on the children, but these are just minor, some nail discoloration. These are minor side effects, and the benefits we get from the drug outweigh these side effects. It's a very useful drug in sickle cell disease, but must not be bought by the parents for the child, but must be prescribed by the physician looking after the child that has sickle cell disease.
which is very important. So you don't want to just go out into the market and just look for hydroxyurea. It has to be prescribed.
Yes.
Although that's a challenge, because you have to find the right kind of doctor who can prescribe the right kind for you. For you people in Abuja and maybe Lagos are very fortunate; they can have access to top-notch physicians. But it's a challenge in villages and other remote areas, I'm sure.
No, actually, I'd like to disabuse your mind of that.
Okay.
Because sickle cell disease is such a common public health problem that all physicians should be and are able to treat sickle cell disease.
Okay.
So all physicians should be able to identify the child with sickle cell disease, identify the child that they can look after in the primary and the secondary healthcare facilities, and identify the child that needs to be referred to the specialist. The bulk of the children are in the community and can be looked after by physicians in the community.
Okay, well, there you have it then. So that's good news, because we always think, oh, just very few people can do that. So that's great. Docs, so sorry we've run out of time. Folks listening in there, I mean, this we probably need to have you come back again and let's treat some of these things at greater detail. But thank you for making the time to do this today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me once again.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well done.
That's it, folks, for With Your Health in Your Hands. We will see you next week. Again, I'm Dr. David Ajibade. Cheers.